Hi friends, I hope everyone's doing well. I have some collage ideas that I want to explore, so I brought out my 5-inch square art journal to create in. This video is part play session, part explore session. I'll go over supplies, design, etc. in each collage section, so let's get started. For this first collage, I'm going to recreate a similar scribbled ground as this finished collage. I created it in my last video. I'll link that video and any other videos I mention in the description area if you're interested in watching. I don't think that the original collage was successful. Using mostly light value papers caused the collage not to look cohesive and there wasn't much contrast. I want to see if I use mostly mid to dark value papers would help the collage to be successful this time. I brought out the same pens that I used for the original collages ground. First, I'm starting with a light blue Sharpie with a thin point. This pen came in a pack with other bright colors. I just used a Posca paint pen in pink, and next I'll be using a yellow Posca paint pen. Now I'm using an orange Sharpie with a thin point that came in the same pack as the light blue Sharpie. The last pen scribble will be made with this black ultra fine point Sharpie. The final two scribbles will be made using Pentel oil pastels. This is an old set of pastels, so the labels are worn and torn. The official color name isn't on the remaining label, but I believe it's cobalt blue. I will use a red one afterwards. These are the papers that I'll be using that are mid to dark values. This collage will have a cruciform composition, which is the same as the original collage. I'm starting by adding red paper for two of the parts of the composition that extends out from the middle. Next, I'm using this cobalt blue paper for the other two sections that extend out from the middle of the composition. The red and blue papers are the main structure that the other papers will be built on. I think there's enough contrast between the scribble ground and these two colors. The original orange and pink papers that I brought out didn't have enough contrast with the red and blue papers, so I brought out these lighter papers in the same colors. I'm deviating from my original concept, but I can tell it wouldn't work. The cruciform wouldn't have enough contrast, which isn't good for a successful collage. I'll be using these lighter papers as accents, so I don't think I'll have the same problem as the original collage. I decided to go with light blue paper for the center element. Again, I want to make sure there's enough contrast within the cruciform. Next, I'm adding some final accent papers. This red and white paper ties in with the red and white from the scribble ground. Adding this dark blue paper on top of the light blue center adds contrast and a good accent detail. I'm happy with the way this collage turned out. I'm curious to know what you think. Do you think this collage is better than the original, or do you like the original? The plan for this collage is to incorporate some rarely used art supplies. The first art supply is this Kuretake Zig Gansai Tambi watercolor in cadmium red. There isn't any markings on the paintbrush, so I don't recall the brand, but it's a 3/4 inch flat brush. Since I'm playing and exploring today, I'm not concerned that I'm not painting on watercolor paper. This is 60-pound drawing paper. I'm aware that the paint won't react the same way. My goal is to put down on paper the design idea that I have in my head. To protect the next page in the journal, I put a piece of wax paper behind the page I'm working on. My vision for this red wavy line is for it to have a dry brush edge on both sides. Next, I'm using Liquitex acrylic ink in carbon black with a Royal soft grip round tip brush in size 6. I put scrap paper on the previous page to contain the splatter. I like to add a small amount of water to thin down the ink a bit. For a bit more control, I use a finger to lightly tap the loaded paintbrush in the area that I want the splatter. These are black and white images from an old encyclopedia. I use old encyclopedia covers for some of my art journals. I remove the original text block and replace it with blank paper. I keep the original text block for ephemera. I chose these images because there's shades of white, gray, and black in each image. I'm cutting the images into small scaling triangles. The design is for the triangles to overlap in an uneven diagonal orientation. By the way, I'm gluing the triangles with a glue stick off camera. Here's the finished mixed media collage. I'm happy with the way it turned out. For this collage, I'll be using Blick's matte acrylic paint in yellow oxide, sage blue, and dark blue light. Instead of a paintbrush, I'll be using plastic palette knives. To protect the other pages bound in the signature, I'm applying a piece of washi tape in the gutter. First up, I'm using this shape palette knife to apply the yellow oxide and sage blue. I like the look of paint being dragged. I don't want a perfect stripe. Also, I'm okay with some of the paper showing through. Next, I'm creating a simple collage on top with only pattern orange papers in light and mid-tone values. Since the paint is applied horizontally, I'm gluing the papers in a vertical design. This is another way to add contrast. And finally, I'm using this shaped palette knife to apply the dark blue light. I want the paint stripes to be thinner but uneven. Here's the finished mixed media collage. I'm happy with the way it turned out. I'm starting this next collage with painting the ground with Blake's matte acrylic paint and yellow light. The design idea came to me when I was falling asleep a few nights ago. Does anybody else dream about collages, or is it only me? By the way, I'm using the same brush as before to paint the ground. There's some yellow oxide on the page from the previous collage, but I'm not concerned about it. The design idea is to have a very light ground and mid to dark value collage elements. This black pattern paper has a circle cutout that was used in a different collage. I like keeping scraps like this to use in other collages. I'm not concerned about the cut at the top of the circle. I'll be covering up some of it with another paper. This light blue with wavy red lines is one of my favorite monoprinted papers I've made. This paper is one of the mid-tone values for this collage. This cobalt blue paper is bright and clean looking compared to the other papers. It provides a good contrast. Also, it's the other mid-tone paper. This bluish black paper is another favorite monoprinted paper of mine. The design of the swirl is very strong. Now it's time to add some small papers to fill in the space. I want to shrink the size of the light yellow square. There's enough of this color inside the partial circle and at the top of the collage. This is the finished collage. It's exactly how I envisioned it would look. I'm very happy with it. This next collage, I'm using transparent papers. There's altered bleeding tissue paper and painted deli paper. I have tutorials on making these types of papers that I'll link below. Usually I like to apply transparent paper with matte medium, but I'm starting to test out using a glue stick instead. In my last video, I used a glue stick on painted and stamped tissue paper. Now I want to try a glue stick on these two types of transparent papers. I'm confident that the papers will stay glued, but I want to see if the papers will melt into the substrate like it does with matte medium. First, I'm gluing down the altered bleeding tissue paper. The first technique is to glue the substrate, then lay the paper on top of it, then go back and glue any missed areas. Each paper will slightly overlap each other to add to the transparent look. Where the red and blue meet isn't melting or fusing into each other as it does when using matte medium. I'm not happy about that. Next, I'm gluing the painted deli paper on top of the altered bleeding tissue paper. This time, I'm leaving the paper in the position where it should be glued, then lifting sections of the paper and glue under it. I brought out this yellow smoothing tool that a friend gifted to me. He bought it at either Home Depot or Lowe's. He couldn't remember which one. Also, he couldn't remember what it's called. It's similar to a rubber finishing tool or silicone rib in making pottery. Anyway, I thought it might be helpful to smooth down the paper. The collage looked like it needed another detail besides the paper, so I brought out some markers. I ended up using just this ultra fine point black Sharpie. I don't want to overdo it. Well, here's the final collage. I'm not sure if I like the look of these glued papers. Let's go on to the next collage. Most of the collages I create are bright and colorful. For this collage, I brought up papers that are darker, muted colors and creamy beige. These are painted and printed used tea bag papers, and these are scraps of book pages and a scrap of an envelope. I'll be using a glue stick for applying all these papers. I want to test out using a glue stick on marked tea bag papers. I love the texture that was created on this monoprinted tea bag paper. This is one of the reasons why I like monoprinting. Even a solid wash of monoprinted color yields an interesting looking paper. I don't want the paper to be too large. It would overpower the collage. Take a look at this brown monoprinted paper. It was printed after the black paper. You can see some of the black paint that remained on the gel plate that was transferred to it. Also, I don't want this dark paper to be cut too big. So far, using a glue stick is working well with these marked tea bag papers. I wish I could remember where I got this page from an old dictionary. I love the patina on it. I have mentioned in previous videos, but it bears repeating. When using ephemera with text, make sure there aren't any words or sayings that others would consider offensive. Take a quick look before using it. I like the look of the painted pattern on this paper. It'll work well on top of other papers. What attracted me to this section of the paper is the half circle on the left side. Once glued, it will give the illusion that the circle is continuing under the black paper. I'm not going to glue it yet. I want to figure out what papers to go under it. This scrap of brown envelope is a good reminder to save all sorts of different paper scraps. It would have been easy to throw it away, but it fits perfectly with the other papers for this collage. Layering with transparent papers takes any collage in a new direction. This ink stamp paper on top of the brown scrap and the brown monoprinted paper adds an interesting detail in this area. On its own, the paper is a good detail, but layering on top of other papers levels it up. Again, a quick read of the scrapbook page for anything offensive before gluing it down. Here's the final collage. I think gluing these transparent papers worked well. Let's have a short recap in the next section. As I mentioned, I like this collage better than the original collage with a similar ground. The collage papers stand out more than the other one that had mostly light value papers. I'm not sure if I'll create another collage with this type of ground. We'll see. I enjoyed creating this collage. It was fun to use art supplies that I haven't used in quite some time. I made a note to create collages incorporating watercolors in the future. Also, I'm glad that I used some of the images from an old encyclopedia. I really like the look of paint that is dragged across the substrate and on top of collage papers. Another collage style that I want to explore further. I'm happy that this collage turned out the way I had envisioned. I love the contrast between the very light ground and the darker collage papers. I like the design idea of this collage, but not the execution. I think it would have turned out better if I had used matte medium instead of a glue stick. The layers of transparent papers would have melted or fused into one another. If I had used matte medium on this paper, the areas that overlap would create another color because the papers would fuse together. When using a glue stick, the upper paper just sits on top of the underneath paper. I love this collage for a few reasons. The first is that using a glue stick worked well with the marked used tea bag papers. Then secondly, this collage has inspired me to make more collages that have dark and muted colors. In regards to adhering transparent papers, a glue stick works well for marked tissue papers and used tea bag papers. Matte medium is better for altered bleeding tissue paper and marked deli paper. I hope you enjoyed and learned something from this video. I will link any videos I mentioned in the description area if you're interested in watching. Thank you for taking time out of your day to watch this video. See you next time. Take care.